What's happening, everybody? Ryan Thomas here live on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Very excited to dive into a new topic today, a topic that has presented itself over the course of the last few days in the MMA world. The last podcast that I recorded was on May 19th. Here we are. It is 1 week later, Tuesday, and Tuesday, May 26th, obviously we're in the midst of this crazy pandemic, which is just unreal. Stuff that I've dealt with during this time frame has not been easy, and it hasn't been easy for anybody. There is no real winner in any of this, and that's what really sucks about this whole thing. But I've tried to put my voice out there as much as possible for sports fans to tune into, put my face out there as much as possible as well on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast Facebook page, posting plenty of live videos, live sports takes, whether they're Buffalo Bills related, whether they're mixed martial arts related, baseball related. We live in a really unprecedented time that has been said by myself and so many others so many times, but I think we'll look back on this and say, well, what do we do to pull ourselves together? What do we do to keep ourselves distracted? What do we do to entertain ourselves? And I think that along the way, if someone can say, hey, I listened to Ryan Thomas, whether it was on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast or the Crowd Assist Podcast presented by Trainwreck Sports, I listened to Ryan Thomas dive into the biggest sports headlines at the time. If people can say that, that is a huge honor for me. It's a huge win for me, just morally and just mentally. That is the best thing that I could do for someone during this really weird, awkward, odd, strange, unique, unprecedented time. So let's dive into it. The topic of today's show, the headline, Conor McGregor, a welterweight contender. You never know what to believe in the rumor mill of any sport, whether it's football, baseball, hockey, mixed martial arts. You never know what to believe. But I would go as far as to say that in terms of the rumor mill of MMA, there is always rumors within a rumor. And a word on the street, the word on the street, is that the UFC is looking at any and all options to fill out each and every fight card in the coming months, June, July, August. Given that we're in these unprecedented times, there are certain fighters that can't fight right now due to where they are located around the globe. But the UFC wants to put a stop to that huge chink in their armor right now. They want to put events on at this quote-unquote fight island that Dana White has been building up, pushing this idea of a fight island, an island that he rented for an extended period of time, probably for the next at least 5 or 6 months, so that when the UFC wants to hold these international fight cards, they'll be able to have these international fighters travel to this island and make it to fight night, make it to these events. And it's a really cool idea. To be quite honest, it's badass that Dana White was able to pull this off. If he does pull this off, again, I've given a lot of criticism to Dana White over the last 4 or 5 years on this podcast, but that would be the one thing that I can honestly say, wow, Dana, you're the boss, man. You are a badass, no doubt about it. So for me to be able to say that, during this time especially, I think really just elevates Dana White to a new level, just superhuman level in terms of what he has done for the sport of mixed martial arts and what he has done to build the UFC into what it is today. Obviously, as I've said before, Dana White deserves a lot of credit for that, but the fighters also deserve a lot of credit for that as well. But there weren't many believers in the sport when Dana White decided to get involved, so credit to him, I think, first and foremost, which makes Dana White, in his own way, the biggest star of the UFC. You do have Conor, You have George St. Pierre back in the day, Anderson Silva, all these legends, Chuck Liddell, Randy Couture, Tito Ortiz, Gracie, Shamrock, all these guys. And Dana White still remains. So, yeah, I guess he is the biggest star in MMA. Oddly enough, it's a pretty unique way to look at things, right? So, Dana White wants to put these fights on. He needs the stars. He needs the attractions. There is no bigger star. There's no bigger attraction. There's no bigger cash cow in the sport of mixed martial arts like Conor McGregor. There never has been, and there maybe never will be in terms of the phenomenon that has been Conor McGregor since he stepped foot into a UFC octagon, knocking out Marcus Brimage on a Facebook fight night where his fight took place on Facebook.com. I remember laying on my love seat in my upstairs bedroom at an old house of mine, watching this fight on Facebook on my laptop, knowing that this guy was a double champ in Cage Warriors in Ireland, and that he was a huge star over there. And he's Irish, so that also helps. Comes in and starts as Marcus Brimage, and off to the races he was. It never stopped. It only continued, and it's only continued no matter what trials and tribulations maybe that Conor McGregor has dealt with over the last, I guess you could say, 3-4 years. He is still the biggest star in the company. He is still the guy that everybody's talking about, for better or for worse. He is the notorious one for a reason. He is polarizing for a reason. And Dana needs to get him back in the octagon. His last performance back in January was a great way to kick off the 2020 MMA year. It was a 42 second knockout over Donald Cerrone. What made that fight so interesting for me, analyzing it prior to the fight actually taking place, was the idea that the fight was not taking place in 155 pounds, which was the then weight class of Conor McGregor, and that was a division that Donald Cerrone was a contender in for quite a long time. But no, that fight took place at 170 pounds at the UFC Welterweight division, and boy did Conor look really good at 170. My biggest Thomas takeaway of that fight was that Conor looked so good at 170, but we didn't see much of him. It only lasted 40 seconds. So I want to see Conor more. I want to see him soon. I want to see him right away. And a lot of things played itself out that were out of everybody's control, namely the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic. They had plans for Conor to fight Justin Gaethje in July. And I have to go back and tell this story in order to talk about where we are right now and why we are where we are right now. So bear with me here, but you guys are tuning in to the podcast, and I greatly appreciate each and every one of you. So they thought that Conor was coming back summer, June, July, International Fight Week maybe, to take on Justin Gaethje. Well, the coronavirus hits. The Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson fight was scrapped due to the fact that Khabib got stuck in Russia, couldn't travel back to the United States, stuck in Russia during the quarantine during this lockdown that is going on all around the world. So the UFC was left scrambling for an opponent for Tony. He wanted to stay active. Justin Gaethje, United States of America fighter, he says he'll step in. He's ready, willing, and able. He steps in. He beats Tony Ferguson for the UFC lightweight interim title. So now Justin Gaethje is on the inside track to a UFC title shot, which takes away the number one contender opportunity for number one contender's fight at 155 for Conor, being that obviously he's not going to fight Tony. Tony just got his ass kicked by Justin Gaethje. Sorry to say that, but he did. And Tony Ferguson would admit it. Tony Ferguson has a lot of facial injuries due to that fight. So the idea of Tony fighting Conor, that's out. Dustin Poirier, Conor already beat. So there's not really much allure to that matchup. Conor has a win over him at 145. Dustin Poirier lost to Khabib. Conor lost to Khabib, but Conor already beat Dustin Poirier, so there's not really a lot of fans clamoring for that. Dustin Poirier then signs on the dotted line to fight Dan Hooker. Conor wasn't fighting Dan Hooker. He's not a big name. He's not really well known, and he's a dangerous opponent. It's a lose-lose scenario for Conor. So what scenario for Conor would put him in a high-profile fight, would create fanfare, positive or negative, and the light bulb goes off in my head that maybe something could be worked out at welterweight again. But never did I ever imagine in my wildest dreams that what I thought could be worked out would actually be a UFC welterweight title shot. Now, I'm not saying here on the Thomas Take Sports podcast that is what Conor McGregor is getting, but it's potentially what he could get. And there are a lot of rumors, very valid sources, that it has been discussed by the UFC brass that UFC welterweight champion Kamaru Usman will defend his title in July against Conor McGregor at 170 pounds. Now, there's two sides to this. There's the business side, and there is the rankings side of things. Whenever a fight is announced, you have to analyze it in that way, first and foremost, before we dive into the strengths and weaknesses of each fighter. First and foremost, can I honestly say that Conor McGregor deserves a shot at Kamaru Usman? No, I can't. He's coming off of a win over Donald Cerrone in 40 seconds. Yes, that it was an impressive win. All credit to Conor. But he didn't knock out Colby Covington or some of the top welterweights. He knocked out a very game fighter, a solid fighter, no doubt about it. But I think the question should be asked right now, is Donald Cerrone the Donald Cerrone of old, or is this a different Donald Cerrone? I'm not taking anything away from Conor's performance. It was masterful. It was beautiful. Beautiful performance. But is that a title shot in that division? Great performance? Beautiful performance? I can't say that. But what I can say is you have a real problem right now in the UFC welterweight division, and you have a real issue for Conor McGregor at lightweight. At lightweight, as I've stated, Justin Gaethje beat Tony Ferguson. That kills the idea of the Khabib fight. The Khabib-Tony fight is dead. Dead and gone. Khabib has a fight with Justin Gaethje that'll probably happen in September. And really, Conor doesn't have many worthy contenders at 155 to take on. Worthy challengers, I should say. So, what's the next best thing? Well, for your UFC welterweight champion, he is in a very similar situation. It was looked at as the BMF title would potentially create an opening for your number one contender if Jorge Masvidal were to get past Nate Diaz. Jorge Masvidal gets past Nate Diaz, but it was a doctor stoppage. You're going to put the baddest mother effer title on the line. Create a belt. And you're going to end that fight with a doctor stoppage. That's a really tough sell to say that Jorge Masvidal is the rightful BMF champ. I know that sounds silly, but they made that fight for that reason. We were going to see bloodshed. We were going to see a war. We were going to see two guys that have always brought it, that will always go toe-to-toe. We didn't see that. We saw them go toe-to-toe. One guy gets cut, and the doctor steps in and says, no, we're not going to let this fight continue. That sucked. We didn't get what we paid for. We didn't get what was advertised to us. We didn't get what we thought we were going to get. Got a cheap second-rate version of what we thought we were getting. So Jorge Masvidal is saying, well, I will acknowledge that and say, well, I want to fight Nate Diaz in a rematch. Well, now you're leaving Kamaru Usman, the UFC welterweight champion, without a number one contender. Without a number one contender that has some pizzazz to his name. Without a number one contender that has the allure of the Ben Askren knockout, the Nate Diaz win, the Darren Till knockout. Now who do you got at 170 pounds? You can't put Kamaru Usman up against Tyron Woodley again because he walked right through him. It was one of the most dominant championship performances ever. You can't challenger versus champion performances, I would say, It was very impressive from Kamaru Usman. You can't put Usman up against the biggest heel that he's ever fought in his career, Colby Covington, his true rival, because it's too soon. And Kamaru Usman TKO'd Colby Covington, broke his jaw. Covington denies that, but it was widely reported that that was the case, even by the UFC. So now Kamaru Usman's left without a fight. So this is one of those cases where in mixed martial arts, you have fighter A and fighter B that are just left without an opponent, and they kind of need each other to bounce off of. Conor needs to fight a champion to get himself the opportunity at a championship title. What would be bigger than Conor McGregor trying to win his third title in his third weight class? There's not many storylines bigger than that in the history of MMA. What would be a bigger win for Kamaru Usman to defend his title against the biggest superstar that the sport has ever seen? It would do wonders for his career, just like it did for Khabib's career. So I get it. I get why Kamaru Usman and Conor could fight. I get it 100%. Does that mean that I think it should happen? I mean, would I watch it? 100%. I mean, who am I kidding here? And for me to sit on the mic and say, oh, it's ridiculous, this is stupid, he doesn't deserve it, he's this, he's that. Well, I could say all those things. I could say that he doesn't deserve it, that a win over Donald Cerrone is just not good enough to piggyback off of to get a title shot. It's just not. I'm sorry, and it's nothing against Cerrone, but one fight at welterweight, and it was his first fight since a loss in his last title shot against Khabib, which wasn't just a loss, it was a dominant loss. It was a one-sided pounding, and Khabib was swinging the hammer. It was not a good performance from Conor at all. Arguably, I would say it was the worst performance of his UFC career. And I would lump that into the Nate Diaz fight, the first one. The Nate Diaz fight, the first one, was a huge upset. But at least he knew that. At least he went back to the drawing board and took Nate seriously for the rematch. With the Khabib fight, it was such a weird build-up. It seemed like his focus just was not there. And then he even admitted as such heading into the Cerrone fight, where his focus did look like it was there. Obviously, those two performances were polar opposites. The Khabib fight, he looked just kind of not really there mentally. He looked out of sync, out of focus, out of sight, out of mind. And then in the Cerrone fight, he was as dialed in as ever. When Conor McGregor is as dialed in as ever, he is dangerous. And I really think that when we dive into all these fights, whether they should or shouldn't happen, a lot of things get tossed aside. We do have to remember, just like in baseball, just like in football, just like in MMA, just like in boxing, it is a business. And that fight between Kamaru Usman and Conor McGregor would be great for business. Before diving into what I think would happen in the fight, I think it's a really bad matchup for Conor, to be honest. But I also think it could be a potentially bad matchup for Kamaru Usman, which makes it a great fight. On the feet, there are a few guys better than Conor. On the ground, there are a few guys better than Usman. Even on the feet, Usman is dangerous. So I have a mixed feeling as far as competitively. I'm not going to give you my pick for the fight right here, right now, but I would lean towards Usman. It'd probably be 55-45 or 60-40 that Usman would win that fight. But I've counted out Conor McGregor against Jose Aldo. Counted him out against Chad Mendes. I've counted him out against Eddie Alvarez. I've counted him out against Floyd Mayweather even. And even in a losing effort against Floyd, he went 10 rounds with him. Counted him out against Khabib, and he did lose to Khabib. But who hasn't? The guy's undefeated, for Christ's sake, 28-0. But all those other times, he proved me wrong. He stopped Chad Mendes when we said, how is he going to do against a wrestler? He stopped him. Knocked out Jose Aldo in 13 seconds. Decimated Eddie Alvarez and went 10 rounds with one of the greatest boxers to ever do it. I don't care what style Floyd claims that he was bringing to the table. I don't care if he said, I told my father I was going to come forward and trade with him. I don't care. I don't care about any of that. I don't care if it's even true that Floyd did that. He took some shots from Conor. He took some shots. Granted, he put himself in that position to take the shots, but he took the shots. Can't just say that those shots didn't count and that they didn't matter. Conor hit Floyd a lot in that fight, more than Manny Pacquiao did. There were two different fights, two very different fights. Floyd fought Conor very differently. I get all that, but it still happened. Those punches are still accounted for. And that matters. That matters. So I am very much looking forward to figuring out what happens next with this, to finding out what happens next with this story. Kamaru Usman has talked about how Conor won so impressively at 170 pounds, and he feels like he deserves the opportunity to take him on. But you notice Kamaru Usman's doing all this, saying, I'll fight him. Conor's not really saying a whole lot. So does he want that a Khabib rematch? He's going to be waiting a long time, and we need Conor McGregor in the cage. He won a 40-second fight over Donald Cerrone in January. It's late May. We need Conor in the octagon. And if this is the way to bring him back, I guess so be it. On the surface, do I think it's ridiculous? 100% just in terms of the rankings within the sport, but this is a business, and there's no bigger draw in the sport of MMA than Conor McGregor. And there you have it. I'm Ryan Thomas. That was the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. You can check out this podcast on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify, SoundCloud, Google Podcasts. It's out there. Just search it. The Thomas Take Sports Podcast. You will find it. I guarantee it. And I hope you enjoyed the show tonight. Hope you enjoyed the next show. Hope you come back for more. You can also find more information about the podcast on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast Facebook page, my Twitter at Ryan Thomas Take, as well at Ryan Thomas Take on Instagram. I love to communicate with each and every one of my listeners, viewers, followers. I love you guys. Thank you so much for the support. Take care. Stay safe out there.